Hello there, Adam Bazalgette here, founder of Scratch Golf Academy. Today, mastering the wrist cock in your backswing or the wrist hinge in your backswing. Very, very important. There's some pitfalls. There's a few words of advice and drills I'll give you. Hopefully they'll be helpful.
So the first thing I'd say about the wrist cock is you generally see very little movement in the wrists at the takeaway. But once the hands have cleared the legs, let's say from this viewpoint, that's when you see most of the wrist cock in that part of the swing. And as a benchmark, and this is certainly not true of all great players, but when the lead arm is parallel to the ground, that's when you'd see a fairly full wrist cock. Gets you in a great position to get in there, compress the ball, and go through your shot.
Okay, so you'll notice there most of the wrist cock was happening in this part of the swing. Something I want to point out to you, this is critical in your wrist cock. I'll choke way down for effect. If you look at the grip end versus my torso, as I hinge, it should actually be making that get farther from the body. In other words, it should really be straightening this lead arm out a little bit. Now, not everyone's built with the flexibility through their lats, etc., that they can have ramrod straight arms. Some people are double jointed and it looks really straight like a Michelle Wee or an Ernie Els. But it should have some widening effect as you hinge, and there should be generally decent structure out there. None of this collapsed trail arm. So check yourself for that. Is the radius of your golf swing staying nice and consistent as you go back? Much more tricky, the things we see from this angle. Let's dive into it. Okay, the most natural way to hinge is directly up and down. Try that for yourself if you have a club that's handy. The trouble is we're making a backswing where we have pivot, and this trail arm is folding, so it does change that a little bit. Now, put the club in front of you once at belt buckle height, and if you had to swing it literally on a horizontal plane, you will notice with no deliberate attempt to rotate that arm, as you pivot, as this arm folds, there is a subtle amount of rotation in that lead forearm, so that's part of it. But here's a way to get the feel, I think, that is the simplest drill I know. This is the easiest, most direct wrist cock, no question about that. Do that. Notice I haven't lifted my arms a lot. Do that, pause for a second, then just take your pivot, let your right arm fold slightly. Now you're starting to get the blend of the most natural wrist hinge there with the natural outcomes of a pivot and the folding of the right arm. And I would do that frequently. Pause, go to the top, and sort of map it into your body, so map it into your mind so you know what that feels like. Then you can start to get there. Nothing much going here. Now I'm starting to feel that hinge very much like this. Again, with the complement, though, of the pivot and the folding of the trail arm. So momentarily, we'll look at flat versus cupped wrist at the top, but let's have a look at the grip just for a second. Well, my arm is totally relaxed. My wrist is pretty much straight there. My knuckles stick out, so it may not look like a flat left wrist, but that is actually a straight wrist, let's say. And certainly when I take a grip, there is a little bit more protrusion of the knuckles. I still think my wrist feels pretty straight, so that's okay. For sure at impact, with all the forces applied, that looks a lot flatter or more bowed, if you like, but that's sufficient to address. So we've got a Dustin Johnson with a wrist like that, Fred Couples with a wrist like that, so it couldn't be an absolute fundamental. There's different ways to do it, but I favor the look where there's just a little bit of angle there. The club face is about parallel to this back of this lead arm. The sort of thing you'd have gotten from that pre-hinge drill a few minutes ago, that sort of a look with a little bit of angle there is what I would like, but there are different ways to do it. So in summary, what are we looking for? Not much wrist action of any kind here. You might feel the slightest downward pressure on the grip, but none of this sort of stuff. From there, assuming we keep the width in the golf swing, there is a very subtle folding of the right arm, a very subtle rotation of the left arm, but largely we're trying to capture that sort of a position so that we have a very neutral look in the club face in the left hand at the top. For the right-handed golfer, practice this stuff. Don't just stand and whack balls at full speed and think about it. Get in front of a mirror, get away from the ball, get good at it. It's not that difficult to do if you'll break it down. I think it will really help you.